Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Channel 781 News Debrief. We took another kind of long hiatus. We didn't feel like there was like a lot to really go in depth on in the City Council. But now that we've stacked a few meetings up, we have several smaller things to talk about. So I'm curious how long this debrief is going to be. We're also going to be talking about Waltham politics as it is, and also an introduction of a new website to help you do that. So with me to talk about this today is our usual Jamie Kelly's
Hi, everyone.
and Tom Benavides.
Hello.
So Tom is actually going to kick this off. We're going to change it up a little bit and talk broadly about where we are right now with Waltham politics, about ways to get engaged, about ways to learn more information in a city where there's just not a lot of information about candidates or about the election. So please, Tom, talk to us about that.
For sure. So yes, I created a website called walthampolitics.com. Very simple, very self-descriptive, easy to remember. And we have our local general election less than a month away now. So there is a tab labeled election information where hopefully if you ever have any questions about upcoming events or want to learn about the candidates, I think just about all the information that is out there I have put on this website, or at least all of it that I was able to find. So it has information on how to vote, how to register to vote, how to register to vote by mail if you want to receive the mail-in ballot. It also has a list of major upcoming events where you can meet the candidates. So there are candidate forums hosted by the League of Women Voters and Watch CDC. Those candidate forums are going to start in about a week. Yeah, in about a week. So all their information is here. They'll be hosted at Government Center. It'll be split up by the groups such as city council candidates, school committee, mayoral candidates. The Waltham Land Trust is also hosting green possibility forums, which is where just candidates talk about sustainability and open space and environmental issues. The first one happened the day that we are recording this for the at-large council candidates, and more will be coming. And then also there is a Meet the Candidates event hosted by the Waltham Chamber of Commerce, which I just believe is candidates will show up and it's just sort of like a mingle and talk sort of event. And then additionally, if you scroll further down the page, have information on every single candidate who will be on the general election ballot, as well as access to any online resources to learn more about them, including interviews they have conducted or surveys that they have filled out. And speaking of that, also through Waltham Inclusive Neighborhoods, we put out a housing specific survey. So if you want to learn about how city council candidates are planning on addressing housing policy specifically, now you can. We got 10 responses, almost entirely from non-incumbents, because I mean, incumbents broadly just seem to be calling it in for a lot of the these sort of like surveys and events. You can see a similar trend along League of Women Voters surveys, and also the first Green Possibilities Forum hosted by the Land Trust, disproportionately attended by non-incumbents and disproportionately not attended by incumbents. But yeah, if you want to learn about issues from humane temporary shelter for unhoused residents to affordable housing, to zoning rules, to the MBTA Communities Act, the positions of 10 candidates can be found here if you want to learn more. But yeah, hopefully this website is a really good resource for people hoping to learn more about the upcoming election. It's easy to share, and then yeah, just make it an easy place to find all the information about elections in Waltham, which is a city where it's not always easy to get all the information about elections and local politics.
That's really nice of you to do, Tom. So can we in real time look up, if you Google Waltham City Council elections, what does the city have? And I haven't planned to do this, so let's see. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see, what do we got? So am I registered to vote? It says list of all official candidates. It shows their doxes them a little bit, which that's cool. Shows their addresses. And early voting, blah, blah, blah. So there's some bare bones stuff here on the city's website and really no information about policy, no information about their website. I am just doing this on the fly, so like if their stuff is here, I apologize to them.
Yeah, so I searched through this actually while making this website. Basically, the first portion of my website, the how to vote, how to register to vote, that is on the Waltham website. But actually, Waltham website, interestingly, previously linked to all the candidates' websites, and then they didn't because they said, oh, it may be a conflict of interest thing because there are fundraising links on the candidate websites. So it was like a conscious choice, probably maybe for good reason, that the city website doesn't link to any candidate policy or websites or information because it may accidentally be linking towards people's fundraising. So it's like an intentionally like low information space in the city council website, which is why this should hopefully be a lot better alternative for people hoping to learn about the candidates.
The website looks very nice though, Tom.
Thank you very much.
And so yeah, what I guess what I'm trying to say is that city website bad, Tom website good. So thank you, Tom, for making that. And yeah, so there are definitely some opportunities to learn more about the candidates coming up soon. Some forums being held, which is great. I'm glad that's happening, especially with the Waltham Inclusive Neighborhoods questionnaire. With Progressive Waltham being defunct, there's less of that information out there now. So I'm glad to see that there are still people doing that kind of stuff. The Green Forums thing just happened just like an hour ago. And so we all watched that. I'm curious if you all have any thoughts about the at-large answers. Tom's right that it was mostly non-incumbents running that are running that came to it. It was nice. I think people said words. I just told these two, but I'm always like pleasantly surprised by the things Tim King says. Like, I don't hate everything he says. I'm like prepared to because of the company that he keeps, but I'm like, not the worst thing in the world when Tim King says his opinions about things. Of course, those are just words, and what he decided to do, he's a city councilor, is different. But if he's one of the people that gets on, I will not be as mad as if some of them got on, as the closest to an endorsement I can get to for that particular candidate. I guess I was kind of disappointed because I didn't hear a lot about how climate change is literally killing us all. I was very fortunate to run for city council a couple of years ago and have the Green Opportunities Forum as well when I was running against Joey LaCava in Ward 5. And I saw this as a great opportunity to remind folks that like literally the world is dying, and just because like you're not hearing about it all the time on the news, it doesn't mean that it's not happening all the time. The world is literally in collapse, and like climate change is like bringing that on like way harder than it needs to be, and human caused climate change. And so there are things that we can be doing, and I didn't feel like there was enough talk about that, but it was nice. The things they said were nice. They talk about conservation and the Charles River Path. I was ready for them to have a lot of like dog whistly comments about people that sleep on the path, but there wasn't really that many, and it was fine. And so I'm excited to hear from other candidates on that. Do either of you have any thoughts about Green Communities Forum?
This isn't necessarily a criticism of the Waltham Land Trust. I think it's just an observation, which kind of like gets back to why aren't you dealing with like, the massive repercussions of climate change that are happening right now and going to like greatly affect how we live on this earth. And I think just generally, Waltham Land Trust is a group that through my observations is focused more on like, homeowner backyard issues. Like, are rats getting into my trash? Are the parks nice? Do we have lots of trees? Do I have like an open space I can walk through my backyard? And not necessarily the more like not immediately visible environmental issues, such as, how we broadly allocate land use between different purposes, or how carbon emissions, like I don't think there was a single mention of carbon emissions, even though that is the driver of climate change, right? So it's just a matter of the Waltham Land Trust focus. They are not a holistic environmental group. They are very much a open space group primarily.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it's not no criticism to the land trust at all. I've been a land trust steward for many, many years now, and I was more just a criticism of the people that were answering the questions because they couldn't turn the land trust questions into talking about climate change. Like they talked about, like, what are we, how are we going to increase green space on the south side, and that can easily be you could easily turn that question into talking about CO2 and congestion and climate change related things, and there wasn't really a lot of talk about it at all. And so really just kind of disappointed in all of the candidates for not bringing up the doomy part of climate change that I think having that pedestal that you're given should be talking about. Although I think Emma Zuma's said the word a couple of times.
I was gonna say Emma Zumas did a little
Yeah.
bit. She talked
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
broader
she said-
things such
she
as
said-
Yeah, she was good at that.
islands. Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess the only other thing to talk about for this is the Waltham Teachers Union released endorsements for school committee candidates. So these are the endorsements: Carolina Lara, Eddie Tarallo, and James Zangi. I guess one of the only interesting things to note is that the Waltham Forward candidate, Tammy, is not on this list. I am surprised by that, but I'm sure it's a blow to Tammy's race, and it makes me reconsider because I really like Carolina Lara, who's been a good friend of mine for years, and I was just not really like impressed with how her campaign was taking off, and I'm not really seeing her like canvas, although some signs are popping up now, which is nice. And so maybe this is good news for her, and but I'm just not as tuned into that conversation about school committee, so I can't really say what the vibes are all around, and if it's weird that they didn't endorse Tammy or not.
I think it's also worth mentioning they gave what was effectively an anti-endorsement to Margaret Donnelly. They were very mad, and understandably so, that Margaret Donnelly did not respond to the teacher union's questionnaire.
Yeah, I
was
can
funny.
share that.
Yeah.
I can share that as well. They released graphics for all of the questions answered, and for Margaret Donnelly, they felt the need. They could have just said that she didn't do it, but they felt the need to put out all the questions that she didn't answer, which I thought was
Yeah, they posted them, but like the thread is
hilarious. Okay, so excited to hear from candidates. Hope you go to these things. Hope you read them, and I'm excited that information is being poured out. Okay, now Jamie is going to chat a little bit about the city council.
all right. So quickly, some things which came up in the most recent city council on October 9th, with more details to come after the committees this next week. So Councilor LeBlanc submitted a late file resolution on optimizing traffic flow in the city, essentially looking for a way to fast track the construction of a number of slip lanes. This will be in Public Works and Public Safety. Colleen Bradley MacArthur introduced a resolution to find a way to improve transit access in the city, essentially piloting bus programs internally with city resources and referencing like the TikTok trolley and things that we can do with what we already have to prove this out. That is also going to Public Works and Public Safety. Jonathan Paz is looking to investigate why the embassy parking lot is no longer usable and how it got to that situation in the state of repair and how to remediate it. That is going to Public Works and Public Safety. The geothermal heating resolution, which was put forward by a number of councilors, is adding infrastructure for residents in the city to be able to use heat pumps in very cold temperatures without requiring an additional gas heater. This will be in Public Works and Public Safety. This is a climate change related resolution, which is sort of broadly supported by councilors. So it seems like it'll be moving forward. And I think that's it.
So on the subject of slip lanes, I just thought I'd like to just say a few words on that, because also it just goes kind of with how the city prioritizes public safety and traffic improvements in the city. Because in the most recent traffic commission meeting, there was actually this discussion where it was just this really interesting thing where like there were a bunch of parking complaints and those were like easily and like quickly addressed. But then there was this issue where like apparently at some place in Warrendale, 2 cars have like crashed into the same house at this intersection in a 6-month period. But then somehow that doesn't meet the warrants to justify a traffic change at that intersection. And it's just really interesting to see how the city and traffic engineering prioritizes public safety and traffic improvements. Because the reason I bring that up with the slip lanes is because slip lanes has that very similar trade-off where slip lanes, the way they increase traffic flow is basically by, instead of cars having to stop and wait in line and turn, they get to go through a more graduated arced turn without having to stop or even slow down nearly as much. And what this does is, it increases traffic flow, but also makes the intersection significantly more dangerous for pedestrians. It makes them have to walk further to get across the intersection. Also provides this entire lane they have to walk across where the cars never have to officially stop, barring they see the pedestrian. And the car not seeing the pedestrian is generally, or the driver not seeing the pedestrian is generally what causes those sorts of collisions and makes slip lanes much more dangerous than just a regular four-way stop. And then this was kind of interesting because at the very end of the traffic commission meeting, Tom Magno, who is on the traffic commission, he's not a traffic engineer. He is a treasurer / collector. But he, at the end of the meeting, we can just put his quote right here.
It seems like when we're talking about neighborhood, it just seems like we're being inconsistent a bit with stop sign versus non-stop sign. At times it seems like, and then I'll say one other thing, it seems like we're emphasizing a neighbor or a couple neighbors' thoughts too much. I think it should be centered on a real policy, but I'll leave it there.
But my recollection, my understanding of what he said is basically, I don't understand how we're making that trade-off between how we prioritize like traffic improvements and danger of an intersection, how that determines whether an intersection is justified to be changed or not, because it seemed a bit illogical from like, an outside perspective. And also at the end of the day, because of this like weird setup, what ends up happening is that he just feels like the traffic commission ends up making changes based on individual people's and individual households' complaints, which is not a very like, this is me now. That's not a very equitable or like, whole-minded way to actually affect and improve traffic in the city. And I just thought that was really dope. I thought, Tom Magno, that is a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because this is a little bit illogical and this is kind of nonsensical in the way that where traffic commission is largely wasting a lot of time on individual cases without really prioritizing them based on how important they are. And there's not really this holistic view of it. At least, well, I'm sure the traffic commissioners and traffic engineer has a holistic perspective of it. That's not, things don't get done in a holistic, like planned out way. It seems a little bit illogical. And I just liked Tom Magno for pointing that out because I totally agreed with where he was coming from.
I did have to say though, I have a bone to pick with Tom Magno because also contrary to exactly what he just professed there, like in a separate traffic commission meeting of several months ago on the subject of a stop sign on Felton Street and I believe Harvard Street, that was originally installed because a lot of constituents living around there had complained about how dangerous that street was and just wanting some traffic calming there. And then Tom Magno took it on himself to, I guess, raise that as an issue as to why is there even a stop sign here in one of those traffic commission meetings, and like, is there some way we can get rid of this? So it's like it sort of unilaterally using anecdotal evidence to want to get rid of something that a bunch of people pushed for already. So I don't know.
This is another example of it being driven by individual preferences as opposed to like a holistic, like actually methodical way to address traffic. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Moving on to 4 more items on the city council. We can talk a little bit about these. Pretty much the most interesting thing that's happened since we've met last is I think the Leland Home resolution, the withdrawal resolution. And so basically I will share my screen to show the resolution itself. And so the old Leland home off of Main Street, if you don't know what it is exactly, I'm sure you would recognize the construction zone that's right off of Main Street. kind of past City Hall. So the city granted a special permit to build this Two Life Communities building, which is a senior living building. And you know, when you do a special permit, you got to say you're going to do X, Y, and Z. When you fill out all your permits, blah 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 blah. What part of that permit was that they were not going to chop down six mature trees that were on the property. And lo and behold, the Two Life Communities tore down those trees. And so everyone involved is kind of pissed about it. But George Darcy, city councilor, took it one step further and wrote up this resolution that is essentially saying he outlines what they did wrong, blah blah blah, and now therefore be resolved that the city of Waltham revoke and rescind the $6 million funding for the Two Life Communities for the loss of these mature trees, which was a recorded condition for the funding provided by the city council, and therefore be it resolved that the Waltham building inspector revoke Two Life Communities construction permit due to violating said condition issued by the Waltham City Council and associated boards. And so I'm just reminded, if I ever knew, that this community was awarded $6 million by the city to also do this. And so when this was on the docket, when this came out, people were like, wow, that's something that's going to happen on the city council. But I was very excited to see the conversation. But as soon as it was read aloud, George Darcy announces, I never signed that, and I would like to withdraw it. And so what I thought was going to be a very lengthy speech, and you know, this is the cool argument when it goes to committee about whether or not they should have it revoked, or whether they should, you know, be slapped on the wrist or have a fine or have to replant the trees or blah 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 blah. George says that he never went through with it, which honestly, if I did my due diligence as a journalist, I would have just called up George and asked him what the hell just happened. But I didn't do that. And so I'm left wondering, why didn't he sign it? Why did he put it in if he didn't sign it? What was his intention? Is this meant to like scare them? Or is this, you know, did he like mistakenly send it without signing it? And then like Joey, and then interesting, and I should mention this. When you're on the city council, you generally try not to like step on the toes of other city councilors in their ward. This the Leland home is in Ward 5, and so this is if the decorum of like politics and politeness were reigning, George should have went to Joey and had Joey submit this, and George could have signed on or vice versa. But there's no Joey LaCava here at all, and so it's a little bit of stepping on toes on Joey's part, and maybe Joey talked to George, but literally, if he submitted this, he should have signed it already. So he submitted it, not signed. And so there's a lot of questions that I don't understand. And a lot of this probably doesn't make a lot of sense to many people. And it all could have been fine if I had just called George and he could have told me, or we could have him on the show, but I didn't do that. And so now I'm left with more questions than I can have answers. But what was going to turn out to be very interesting turned out to be interesting in a different way, but not interesting at all, in that this isn't going to happen. This fight about Lillian Home isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and just for those who don't know, I can also just discuss the background of the Leland home, which the Leland home is a 40B development. And what that means is that the Leland home is too dense to exist in this part of Waltham according to our zoning code. So the Two Life developers used a state law to say, hey, we're going to ignore your zoning and apply for a special permit regardless, because y'all don't have enough affordable housing and we are going to provide affordable housing. Therefore, we can use this 40B law, which is a state law, to build this housing. So then it went through the special permit process, and it was basically just negotiations between city council and Leland Home, or Two Life Communities, saying, okay, let's negotiate what the conditions are to let this development go forward. With a lot of leverage being in Two Life Communities' favor, because as a 40B development, Waltham is sort of required to let them go forward. So the big debates were like, A, how much CPC funding Waltham was going to give to Two Life Communities. And that ended up being like 6 million. I guess I'm just now learning on the condition that Two Life Communities don't cut down 6 trees, which they ended up doing, hence this crisis right now. But also way back then, there was also this whole discussion of how big Leland Home should be. or how big the new Leland House development should be. Because the original plan was for it to have 78 units of affordable housing. So 78 out of 78 units. This is 100% affordable housing development. And there just wouldn't be a lot of parking because A, multifamily housing doesn't require a lot of parking. B, affordable multifamily development requires even less parking. And C, seniors in affordable multifamily housing use very little parking. Like most of these folks don't drive. So the original plan was to have not a lot of parking and then 78 units of affordable housing, or 77, I mean. But then some Ward 5 neighbors of the more not in my backyard mindset were like, hey, this is too much affordable housing to be in our backyard. We don't care for that. And then Joey LaCava took up that cause. So that was a big thing in 2019 when this was happening. Joey LaCava essentially got the city council to negotiate with Two Life Communities down. So in additional to that, like $6 million in the tree negotiations in the special permit, there was also the situation where Leland House now has 11 fewer affordable housing units than it originally would have. Joey LaCava and City Council negotiated down the affordable housing units from 77 to 66 units in exchange for increasing the amount of parking spots in this development by 11 parking spots. So yeah, in my mind, I'm a part of Waltham Educators neighborhoods. I'm a big housing advocate. This was a huge loss. But the city and our Waltham channel reporters reported it as a big win. But that's just more of the background of like what this development is, how it came to be.
Thank you. I probably should have said a lot of those words before explaining the drama of the actual resolution. And yeah, I remember, I was running against Joey LaCava during that time when all those negotiations happened and there were less units. It was such a win for Joey LaCava. And I'm just standing there like, what the hell are we talking about right now? But I was too far and it was too late in the game to really make it as big of an issue as I should have. Definitely something I should have done. Okay, moving on to the Yom Kippur resolution. This was an interesting one for me. I'm going to share my screen again. And so the holiday of Yom Kippur just happened, probably the holiest day of the year in the Jewish community. And Paul Cates missed the last city council meeting, or the one before that, because it was on Yom Kippur. And every Yom Kippur, people are like, shouldn't we like not be having city council during this time? And so George, I guess, finally putting action to that, developed this very nice resolution, and in the city council talked for like 5 minutes about all of the wonderful achievements and all of the wonderful culture of the Jewish community in Waltham. We have a very lengthy history. I'm not going to read off the entire resolution, but it's a wonderful community in Waltham. I am a part of it, and so George goes on and on about that, and was like, therefore, be it resolved, we should look into matching because on Yom Kippur there's no school, but for some reason, like the city council still meets, and so trying to make that an official holiday, making sure that it's recognized in every way. And then Paul Cates, who I believe is the only Jewish member of the city council currently, follows up immediately with, thank you very much, George, for doing that. I appreciate that very much. But I feel that this is a distraction. Actually, because this just happened at the city council, we don't have the recording just yet, and I watched it live. So I don't want to put words in Paul Cates' mouth, so I cannot say verbatim. But it says essentially that this is a distraction for what's going on in Israel and the Middle East, and he would prefer just to keep focus on what's going on there, and that we should withdraw this. And he did make that motion, and they was filed without prejudice or roll call unanimously. And so I was left again feeling weirded out by it, because like if the city council somehow had a say in what was going on in the politics of the Middle East, I could understand where if you would want to put all of their energy into like peace negotiations or something like that. But the Waltham City Council has very little to do with that. And so I was confused why we're not making Yom Kippur a municipal holiday. That would be, I thought we could do that and also focus our energies towards that, towards what's going on in the Middle East as well. I was a little confused by that, and I was disappointed to see that. And we're going to touch very briefly on zoning with parking. Tom will introduce that for us.
Yeah, so similar to the complaints I just made about traffic emission and how there's not really systemic, holistic way that we tackle traffic issues. We kind of just do it on a case-by-case basis, sort of with like arbitrary metrics of like, what's safe and what's necessary and what isn't. It's very similar to how we approach zoning and in Waltham. Because for those who don't know, zoning, how we decide land use, is almost entirely controlled by city council at the local level, normally informed by professionals in the planning department. But Waltham kind of doesn't do that, We barely have a planning department that's so emaciated that they aren't even really being involved with the MBTA Communities Act. That's something we were kind of caught with our pants down on, where the state was saying, hey, we need to rezone, and Waltham was saying, hey, we don't know how to rezone, which is a little bit embarrassing. But anyway, this is just another example of how Waltham kind of like addresses things on a case-by-case basis rather than like a holistic, planned out way. So basically what's happening is that, Waltham has made zero progress on MBTA Communities Act zoning compliance. There hasn't really been much big zoning changes going through Waltham because there's no one in our city government who knows how to make these like broad brush like planning decisions. But we do still handle things on a case-by-case basis. And that ends up being where like we just show how we have really weird priorities. So basically this zoning resolution that's in front of ordinances and rules, I believe it was put forward by LeBlanc. It's a zoning resolution where it's basically, the gist of it is that those like $1 million duplexes going up the south side, those are, that's relatively low density housing being constructed for disproportionately wealthy people, and therefore, ergo, the people who inhabit those types of housing tend to have a lot of cars, a lot more than the average Waltham resident. And LeBlanc brought up, hey, it's not really possible to, I think the complaint was, I'm not 100% certain on this, I'm pretty sure his complaint was that it's not possible or not easy to make 2-car garages. Like our zoning code just doesn't make that feasible. And we should be allowing 2-car garages in these duplexes that are coming on the south side. So he's pushing for that, and he's also pushing for zoning changes to make it easier to build backyard pools. For those who aren't aware of the housing situation in Waltham, we currently have a housing crisis. It's like really expensive to build housing. The housing that is built is really expensive. And then have this really bad parking situation where the really old buildings that weren't built with any parking are like really crowded. But then all of the new development, we have really high parking minimums. So we have situations where, like, for example, the Edison on the Charles, that housing development, not even close to transit, but because it's multifamily housing, people tend to drive less cars, and like 20% of the parking spots in that development are never used because we just require way more parking than is actually allowed. So there are a lot of like major housing and zoning and parking issues in Waltham to be addressed. But because we're on this like case-by-case basis, which kind of just happens where we see zoning changes whenever influential or like people who have city councilors' ears, whenever they complain, that's when we make zoning changes. We have this really weird priority structure where currently we have zoning changes going through city council to make it easier to build backyard pools and make it easier to build 2-car garages for really wealthy households. But we're not making any progress on housing affordability in our zoning code or like making more appropriate parking minimums in our zoning code. And it's just part of a really flawed system. Waltham should be like, most cities have like very fleshed out and powerful and like thoughtful planning departments because, city planning is a major issue that tackles so many problems that needs to be addressed from a holistic and planned out manner. But Waltham's just addressing things on a case-by-case basis, which have no basis on what should be prioritized and should not be. And then suddenly we have these really weird zoning changes going through, and there's still crickets on MBTA Communities Act.
And the building department being involved in evicting people.
Yeah, yeah. Like we could be altering our zoning code to see like, okay, well, how did this happen? What should the zoning code be to make sure these people who are living here, you know, they obviously have housing needs. So where should we be allocating this housing? No one's addressing that. They're only just kicking people out because they're just addressing issues on a case by case basis.
Using a way to do enforcement rather than like find a way to like solve the problem.
Yeah. We have an affordable housing resolution that's going through city council right now, also proposed by LeBlanc way back in like 2021, February 2021. And it's basically saying that like, it doesn't address any of the root causes of zoning or how to create more affordable housing. It's just saying, hey, the city should look at how to purchase currently existing market rate homes and then deed restrict them as affordable housing home ownership opportunities for lower income families. Not a bad thing, you know, but it doesn't actually address any of the problems. It's not addressing the housing shortage. It's once again on a case by case basis of trying to like help one or two people without acknowledging this is a citywide issue. Y'all are the ones who saw the most recent city council meeting, but you made it sound like it's not going anywhere anyway.
Well, but Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't this sent to the master plan committee? Didn't that just happen?
I believe this was the one that was sent to the master plan committee with
Yeah.
the other zoning
Yeah,
changes.
and so, you know, if you watch the show, you understand our complaints about the master plan committee, but I can't decide if it being sent to the master plan committee is another way of like essentially filing it and saying that it's just going to be sucked into a conversation made with consultants around data that doesn't exist, or if it's important to them and that they're putting it aside for some reason, but it just doesn't make any sense to me because like they're like, oh, it needs to be part of the conversation of these magical consultants making a master plan, helping us make a master plan. But like, who gets to decide that? Who gets to decide what's important enough to be included in that conversation? Like, shouldn't just all of the docket, like every single item, be pushed into the master plan committee because that should be talked about in relation to a master plan? Like, who gets to decide which resolutions? Especially because like that one was from 2021. It's just, you know, either just like file them
Well, it's framing the conversation too, right? So if they are having like this in the context of that meeting, right? Those are the only things on the table. That's the extent of what affordable housing changes are being proposed then, right?
I mean, I can't think off the top of my head of anything else. But like, so is some of the biking stuff was also sent over there, and so it's just like convenient that it's essentially filibustering. I've said this before, but putting things to the master plan committee, which is something that has only met once in the entire time that's existed, is essentially filibustering.
I would appreciate some sort of timeline for when this is supposed to have a meeting, because like
That'd be
the
nice.
last meeting for it was supposed to have been last year, like in a month from now. So I think it's it's been a year old.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's convenient that all of the resolutions that I would like to see talked about more are being sent off to a place that literally never gets talked about. But yes, that just happened. That resolution, which hasn't been talked about, I can't remember. I mean, 2021 wasn't that long ago. I don't really remember any forward momentum there at all. Is now being sent to the master plan committee, which will never be talked about. And I think that's it. I think that's it for our show. Excited to see what happens with the election. Excited to see what happens with the city council. Excited to see more interesting things happen in the city council where we can talk more at length. But I'm sure people appreciate a Channel 71 news debrief that's not an hour and 15 minutes long. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jamie, for coming, for chatting, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.